All right. Well, good Monday, everyone. Welcome to Mondays with Manny. I'm your host, Manny Rodriguez, and this is a live cast. We do have some folks joining me live. And in this live cast, of course, we discuss common problems organizations face and how to deal with them using the science of behavior. Special thanks before I get started to Business Science Magazine, the sponsor of Mondays with Manny, also 305 Publishing, the OBM Alliance, and my teammates at Bueno Ventures. Um, Another kind of little plug, coming soon from some colleagues at Behavior Leader, that's behaviorleader.com. We're going to be doing some ongoing events, panel discussions, and many of those panel discussions will be talking about the same common problems organizations face that we discuss here on Mondays with Manny. They're just going to go a little bit deeper, and it's going to be a panel discussion with 4 other colleagues of mine, including myself, Dr. Natalie Parks, and some other colleagues will be joining us for discussing these common problems organizations face and how to tackle them using the science of behavior. So here on Mondays with Manny, of course, we tackle them within 20 to 30 minutes. So it's a bit of a brief kind of synopsis of how to tackle these problems. But in those events, coming to you from behaviorleader.com, we're going to tackle them even more. We're going to go deeper. So that's it. That's the plug for the day, if you will. So thanks for letting me do that. And thank you all who's joining me live. Really appreciate your time here. And for those watching the recording, I hope you enjoy. Today's topic I wanted to tackle is training in organizations, and how to tackle them using some science of behavior so you can maximize your training efforts, get the best out of the people you're training, and make sure you tackle and get those organizational business results you're trying to achieve. Specifically, we're going to talk a few things. We're going to talk about some principles of instructional design from a colleague of mine. We're going to talk about a 3-part performance-based learning objectives from a guy named Robert Mager. And before all of that, I just want to touch on the idea of starting with performance analysis or a needs analysis. And we'll talk a little bit about that right now. So when it comes to training in organizations, the reason why I consider this a common problem organizations face is training is actually a multi-billion-dollar industry all in of itself. So today we don't even hear the word training as much as we hear talent development or leadership development or training and development. But training is by itself an umbrella term for all the things that go into making sure we have good, proper onboarding, classroom training, on-the-job training, virtual training, and also what's now referred to as blended learning is kind of the combination of all those things combined. However, if you talk to a learning and development professional or a training and development professional, the first thing that they teach you, and it's a very scientific approach to training, is to do what's called a performance analysis or a needs analysis. Now, you can Google performance analysis or needs analysis, and you're going to get inundated with all sorts of information, all sorts of resources. I'll share with you a couple of resources in a little while. But in regards to kind of zeroing in a few words, what is a performance analysis or a needs analysis? It really is, at the end of the day, trying to determine, is it a knowledge gap or a skill gap that the performer that we're trying to train has? Is it a knowledge gap or a skill gap? If it's neither one of those, could it even be something else? Could something else be causing the performance issue? Could it be a policy problem or a procedural problem? Has nothing to do with the person itself. See, the whole notion of answering these two questions, is it truly a knowledge or skill gap, or could it be something else causing the performance issue? Those two questions can start you off the path of really determining what is the right solution. See, training alone isn't the best solution. Actually, often training is not the solution. Training could be part of a solution package, as we call it in OBM practice. Much of the time, training is like the last answer. You usually train after you determine if you need a new policy or a new procedure, or maybe you just need some job aids. Maybe they've already done that work before, they just haven't done it in a very long time. So this notion of, is it a knowledge gap or a skill gap? That's question number 1. Or could it be something else causing the performance issue? That's question number 2. And those two questions get you started in the performance analysis or needs analysis process. Now, above that, on top of that, if you wanted to go a little bit deeper on performance analysis for today's Mondays with Manny, the only other thing I would consider providing you at this time is besides those two questions, think about the organizational goals and objectives for the year. So you want all of your training efforts to be anchored and grounded and connected to whatever it is the organization is trying to achieve this year or within the next year. So that's all part of aligning your training efforts with your organizational strategic efforts. If you try to implement too much training on tasks or activities that are not important to the business, you could find yourself running into a brick wall. You're going to put all this time and energy into your training efforts, and then come to find out a few months later, the organization doesn't have time for that, and they're going to shift your priorities, and you're going to feel like that was a whole lot of wasted efforts. So in your performance analysis or needs analysis, you want to make sure whatever you're looking to train is actually connected to a larger strategic priority for the company. Okay, so that's a bit about performance analysis or needs analysis. There's methodologies, there's procedures on how to do these things, there's tools and techniques out there. It's very comprehensive in the world of learning and development, right? But it's all grounded in really good science. It's all about direct observation, gathering facts and figures, gathering intel from stakeholders, putting it all together, and really identifying what does the organization need, what do the performers need in regards to a training solution, and how do we provide that? Okay, so I want to turn our heads now to some principles to instructional design. And this comes from a colleague of mine, Barbara Buckland of the Buckland Group. And I'm going to put that for those in the live chat. I'm going to put her name and her company's contact information, and I'll slap it in the recording at the end. But Dr. Barbara Buckland, OBM professional for over 30 years, formed her own company after spending a great deal of time at a company called Ardent Learning. And Barbara really distills 7 key principles to instructional design very nicely, very cleanly, based on all her years of experience and research as well. And there's an article that she wrote this in, and I'm going to provide the article to you all who are here in the live cast, and I'll splash it on the screen as well. She wrote it back in 2018. The title is called Tips for Training Your Staff, Basic Instructional Design. She wrote it for Behavioral Science of the 21st Century blog. And it's a great little article, provides the following 7 principles to instructional design that I'm just going to illustrate right now. Number 1, focus on the learner. So the whole purpose of good instructional design is that the learner gets the right experience and we get the right results from the learner. So focusing on the learner, principle number 1. That should come as no surprise. The whole intention of good instructional design is to instruct a learner. Number 2, write measurable objectives. One of the easiest things to identify as a problem in instructional design is the lack of measurable objectives. And if you can write in very clear measurable objectives in your instructional design, you're already going in a accelerated pace to achieve the goals you're trying to achieve. Number 3, provide active, meaningful practice. The students learn what the student does. I like to say the best type of learning is by doing, right? So providing active, meaningful practice in your instructional design is principle number 3. There's way too much time spent in training classrooms, even on the job training, where somebody's instructing, direct instructing. They're just telling you what to do, but they're not letting you have the opportunity to actually practice what to do. So good instructional design, principle number 3, provide active, meaningful practice. Principle number 4, teach, practice, and test in context. So too often we rely heavily on classroom-based training. The problem with that is it's not in the context of which the performer is going to be doing the job. So the more common way to refer to that is on-the-job training. However, it could even be beyond on-the-job training. It could be in context using scenarios. It could be in context doing role plays. It could be in context actually facing the scenario on the job, but not as a trial run, but actually live. So you see this a lot with people that deal with customers, focusing on customer service skills, for example, or service delivery. They actually put the performer in front of the customer to demonstrate the skills that they were being trained to do. So principle number 4, teach, practice, and test in context. Principle number 5, chunk content in appropriate step sizes. In behavioral science, we call this shaping steps, right? We call these, and it's also building in some behavioral momentum and learning. So I won't go into those two terms today for those that don't know it, but it's shaping and behavioral momentum. And so Barbara Buckland talks about chunking content in appropriate step sizes. So you're not tackling way too much of the content all at once. You're doing it in very micro steps so that the learner actually can accelerate their learning. Number 6, provide immediate descriptive feedback. This is in the moment of the learning itself. So making sure that the learner gets really clear descriptive feedback in that moment of learning so that they can connect the dots, so to speak. And then last but not least, number 7, principle number 7, design effective tests. You want to make sure that we are measuring the learner's learning. So tests could be all variety of sorts, could be verbal, could be written, right? Could be physical demonstration of a task. So the intention is to make sure you design, as part of your instructional design, some really good effective testing of the learner's learning. All right, so those were Barbara Buckland's 7 Principles of Instructional Design. Hope you enjoyed the article. I highly recommend you read it. It's a quick read. Thank you for that. So to kind of wrap up Mondays with Manny today with regards to instructional design, I wanted to take us back a few years to the work of Robert Mager. Robert Mager is one of the pioneers, if you will, of performance improvement and using behavioral science strategies for performance improvement. And he wrote a book back in 1997 called Preparing Instructional Objectives, a critical tool in the development of effective instruction. And I put the citation there for those in the live audience, and I'll splash it on the screen for those watching the recording. But what Robert Mager did very, very well was he communicated effectively to a business audience, to the everyday professional out there looking to make a positive difference in the workplace. And in this case, how to do it through preparing good instructional objectives. Now, to kind of summarize this whole book is kind of a Herculean task, but I wanted to just provide to you the 3 parts of performance-based learning objectives by Robert Mager. And I leave you with these 3 because if you can take the 7 principles by Barbara Buckland and these 3 parts of performance-based learning objectives and you put it together in your training efforts, you're going to accelerate your training efforts 10 times fold. So the 3-part performance-based learning objectives by Robert Mager are the following. First, performance by the learner. So again, this is kind of tied to Barbara Buckland's first point of focusing on the learner. But what Robert Mager is trying to say here is, what is the performance that you're looking for? What is the objective, the performance by the learner? What's the behavior that you're trying to see them do? And what's the outcome that you're trying to see them achieve, right? So performance is both behaviors and outcome. Number 2, conditions under which the learner must perform. So the performance-based learning objective must attend to the conditions in which the learner must perform the performance in. So is it indoors or outdoors? Is it a manufacturing facility or an office in front of a computer? Is it a specific customer type, or is it all customers? And then, of course, what's the objective of those conditions? Are we trying to land a sale? Are we trying to service the customer, do delivery? Are we trying to attend to a customer's inquiry? What's the condition? What's the outcome we're trying to achieve? So that's number 2. That's the conditions under which the learner must perform. And finally, number 3, criteria by which it's evaluated. So what that means is, how are we going to decide that the learner learned, that the objectives were met, that the outcome was achieved the right way? So again, performance, number 1, behavior and outcomes, conditions, under what context, and number 3, criteria, how we're going to evaluate whether the learner learned. And these are the 3-part performance-based learning objectives by Robert Mager. So that's the extent of Mondays with Manny when it comes to training. And ironically, I cut this really short because training is such a big topic. How to do effective training, how not to do effective training. And when you do some research and literature reviews and you just read a little bit on instructional design, it really boils down to those principles and those 3-part performance-based objectives, I think. So you can get lost in this in the litany of literature out there around training. And that's why it's a multi-billion dollar industry, is because there's so much out there and they flood us with all this information. But when you boil it down into those principles and those objectives, you can really accelerate people's learning and the business outcomes trying to be achieved by all that training effort. So I'm going to cut Mondays with Manny today on that note. I really appreciate everybody listening. For those on the live cast, stay tuned. I'll be happy to answer all your Q&A. We'll do a live Q&A as soon as I end recording. So thank you for watching Mondays with Manny on training, and I will see you next time.